So I recently had somebody ask me, should drop sets be included in a training program for muscle growth? And what a great question that is. So if you're looking to take your workouts to the next level, are drop sets what you need? Well, today I'm going to break down what drop sets are, how they work, and why they could be a game changer for your muscle building journey. So first of all, drop sets are a technique where you perform an exercise to failure, then immediately reduce the weight and continue performing more reps. This process is repeated several times to really push your muscles to their breaking point. Thus, this training method appears to operate under the premise that drop sets allow for high mechanical stress from the high load training, along with high metabolic fatigue induced from the training load reduction. But will performing drop sets lead to a greater amount of muscle growth compared to traditional training? Well, let's take a look at the evidence. So a study by Ozaki and colleagues conducted a study where non-resistance trained individuals were randomized to perform bicep curls under 3 different conditions. Group 1 performed 3 sets of high load training at 80% of their 1 rep max. Group 2 performed 3 sets of low load training at around 30% of their 1 rep max. And finally, Group 3 performed a single set of high load training at 80% 1 rep max, followed by an additional drop sets, descending down to a low load of 30% of their 1 rep max. All the participants performed their sets to failure, and muscle size in the upper arm was measured before and after an 8-week training period using the gold standard MRI. Both groups saw an increase in muscle size, but there were no statistical differences between the drop set condition and the traditional training method. Now, the study concluded that while drop sets didn't lead to superior muscle growth, they did allow for similar results in less time, making them a more efficient option for training. Now, another study by Thinkink and colleagues looked at muscle growth changes after 6 weeks of drop set training versus traditional training in individuals who were new to resistance training. Now, in the drop set condition, the participants completed 1 set starting with a 12 rep max load and then reduced the weight by 20% after each failure, continuing until this approach to failure was reached 3 times. The traditional group performed 3 sets to failure, each using a 12 rep max load with 90 seconds of rest between sets. Now, muscle cross-sectional area or CSA of the triceps was measured before and after the 6-week training intervention using MRI. The results showed a 10% increase in muscle CSA for the drop set group and a 5.2% increase for the traditional training group, with no significant differences between the two. These findings suggest that, like the Ozaki study and colleagues, drop sets can lead to similar muscle growth, but in a more time-efficient manner. In the drop set group, participants began with a 5 rep max load and performed the set to failure. After reaching failure, the load was reduced by 20% and they continued to failure again. This process was repeated, with the load being reduced by 10 to 15% until failure was reached for a final time. In contrast, the traditional training group used a 15 rep max load and performed sets to failure without any weight adjustments. When the researchers assessed muscle growth, they found that the drop set group experienced greater muscle size increases in the rectus femoris at the 30 and 50% muscle lengths. However, no significant differences were found at the other measurement sites, like the vastus lateralis or at the upper portion of the rectus femoris at the 70% site of the muscle length. These authors concluded that drop sets may lead to non-uniform hypertrophy. Now, while the evidence is limited, the study suggests that drop sets could potentially promote greater muscle growth in certain areas. Now, a recent meta-analysis on this topic by Colan and colleagues, interestingly, it only included 5 papers, but nonetheless, they analyzed papers that compared the effects of drop set training versus traditional training on muscle strength and hypertrophy. Now, after analyzing the 5 studies, the results showed that both drop sets and traditional training led to similar effects on muscle growth and strength. However, drop sets were found to be a more time-efficient option, reducing the workout time by 30 to 70% when compared to the traditional training approaches. So, what are my main takeaways? Well, overall, drop sets can be an effective strategy for increasing muscle size. However, contrary to the popular belief, the evidence doesn't strongly support that they lead to significantly better growth compared to traditional training methods. Now, that being said, there is some evidence suggesting that drop sets may promote more muscle growth in specific muscle groups, particularly in the lower body, although I'm not sure that this evidence is overwhelmingly compelling. So the main advantage of drop sets seems to be their time efficiency, allowing you to maximize muscle engagement in a shorter amount of time.